Okay, we're going to make a start. It's now 5 past, coming up to 9:05. So welcome everybody for attending, and I just want to thank everybody who is watching and listening, because I do appreciate that it's been an exceptionally challenging last couple of months, and that this is a very late stage in the term. So we do appreciate all of the people who've made time to come and attend the sessions this morning. We do believe from Whole Education, my name is Lisa Ling, I look after the secondary phase of Whole Education, and I will introduce all of the presenters and panellists in a moment. But we do appreciate that it's now more than ever important that we are listening to one another from the profession for support, guidance and strength to do the right thing for all of the students in our care and for all of the students within our own contexts. So I'm delighted that you're here today to listen from peers about what they are doing at this particular time. So we're obviously, as always, Whole Education and I are overwhelmed by the generosity of our network leaders who have gifted their time to be here today and to present and to be on panels. Obviously, David Crossley, today's host and facilitator, an all-round wonderful person, will introduce people at the start of each session. But I would like to say a huge thank you to Hannah Wilson, who's joining us today, John Clark, Ruth Powley, Shona Pilgrim, Les Hall, who's joining us at 11 o'clock, Jonathan Bishop, a welcome guest and key school of our partner GL, and later on in the morning, Alex Quigley. Also a huge thank you to our co-collaborators for today's sessions, GL Assessment. We have Dan Sims, Danielle Morgan and James O'Brien, and James is going to be presenting some GL solutions as part of our session 1 this morning. If you do want any further conversations with Whole Education or with GL assessments, then we'd be delighted to have a call or an email exchange with you over the coming days. So please do feel free to contact the respective organisations. We will be sending out with the recordings of this morning some ways that you can be in touch. So the order of today, as I've said, David will be hosting and facilitating. I want to just run through the timetable. So Alex, if you could put that slide up, please. So for those of you who joined us on the 9th of June, we are keeping the same running order. So there are 4 45-minute sessions. Each will start at 1/4 the hour. There will then be 3 breaks at 10, 11 and 12 o'clock. This event has been oversubscribed, so I would urge you to stay connected. Les, hello, welcome, wonderful that you can join us. I would suggest that you stay connected during the breaks so that you can make sure that you can attend all 4 sessions. If you have any questions for any of the presenters, can you please put those in the Q&A section? We will try to keep an eye on those questions, and David and the team will be presenting those, and we'll try to respond during the morning. Any questions we can't respond to, we'll respond after the event over the coming days. And we'll share the answers to those questions with you when we send out the recordings. If you do have any comments that you want to make or any technical issues, then please put those in the chat function. I think that's everything now. So, oh, Hannah?
Lisa, there's a few comments. I don't think they saw the schedule. Could Alex put the schedule back up and click to the second slide, please?
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So, Alex, if you could just share the schedule for a second, please. Is Alex there?
I'll talk through it.
Okay, so David will talk through the schedule when he does his 10th. Thank you very much for that, Hannah. And so without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to David Crossley. So David.
Thank you. We've got Alex's screen. Okay, we lost it actually. The agenda for the morning. Just to run through the agenda for the morning, I'll be introducing the session. I'm David Crossley, the Director of Whole Ed. And the 3 sessions this morning, 9:15 to 10, when we have a well-earned break, and we'll ask you to share what you eat and drink in the break on chat. It's always interesting to see the wonderful inspiration people have, or even the ordinary biscuits. We've got second session from 10:15 to 11. The third is 11:15 to 12, and then a closing highlight with Alex from 12:15 to 1 o'clock. So we basically have a break slightly more regularly than we'd have normally at a conference, which is a chance to sort of stretch the legs and do whatever you do. So that's the plan for the morning. We can go back to me on screen now, Alex. Thank you. A very warm welcome from me too, and thanks to Lisa and the team for all the effort that goes into organising these events. This is the second of these large virtual conferences, and probably focusing on the most important thing of all, the learner and their learning, which is always a challenge if we think of the model of education in schools, and is it because in the final analysis we have one teacher and some 25 to 30 children or students in front of them, and meeting each individual need, it doesn't take many calculations to realize that's somewhat of a challenge. But one of the things, and then the first session will focus, is helping us to know better and understand what those needs and gaps in learning are, and Hannah will introduce that to us. And also towards the end of the session, as well as two participants, heads from our network who will grapple with that question of what they're doing on the ground too, who will follow Hannah, will also be looking about how far can being better data informed help us and be part of our armory of helping us better meet the learners and their needs. The second session is one that goes to the heart of it, and probably summed up with the phrase, what goes on in the classroom matters most. And it's a joy to have Ruth, again, from our network at Winslow, and she's a writer of the book Powerful Pedagogy, and she'll talk with us about, in the end, if we get the learning in the classroom right, that answers a lot of the questions. Thirdly, something we've all grappled with massively during this period of lockdown is IT an answer. IT hasn't perhaps been as much of an answer for education as it might have been compared to many other sectors of life and work, although certainly there's been some rapid developments during the lockdown. But I think one of the interesting things, and we're delighted that Shona will share her work, because she's interested in IT not so much as a technical tool, about how it can help build and maintain relationships, very much a whole ed approach to that. And with colleagues, we'll be looking from across the network, looking at the value it can add, and recognizing it isn't the platform or the technology it's used, it's what you do and how you use it. And the final session is responding to an issue that's been at the heart of some of whole ed's work over the last year. If you get this right, a lot follows, is the way you deal with and respond to the vocabulary gap. One of the key tools, obviously, for students in accessing what we offer. It's been a major piece of work that Lisa has spearheaded within whole education, working with some local authorities areas around the country, notably Bolton. And Alex can share and will share his work and his thinking as an inspirational end to the morning and early afternoon. We hope you'll stay with us through the course. There's breaks along the way. We were really proud on the number who stayed with us in the last session. Enjoy the breaks and the thinking and the reflection. This whole ed is a network that's all about not only sharing what people do, which is the focus of this morning, but also developing work together collaboratively across schools and across the network, and working with effective and thinking partners like GL Education who are with us today. And if you like that notion of not only sharing, but also contributing, developing and collaborating, whole ed's a great place to be. And if you're interested in follow-up, just log an interest in the chat. The chat's there all morning for you to put comments and reflections as we go along. Also use the Q&A function to ask specific questions too. We'll be monitoring both those across the morning. Our participants, our panelists, I encourage you as ever to answer to any specific questions as well. So you may find you get some personal answers along the way as we go along. And if anything hasn't answered, one of the things we do is summarize the questions and respond in the follow-up to the session. So without further ado, it's a great pleasure for me to welcome our first guest for our first session. That's Hannah Wilson, who's now becoming part of whole ed. She previously led women's ed, and her particular interest is in how to best meet the needs of different learners, including aspects like their mental health and how we respond to gaps in student socialisation, which is particularly pertinent at this time. So welcome, Hannah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to go to my slide share. There we go. Okay, so thinking about recovery, and just to reiterate what Lisa was saying, some of the language I'm seeing being used about recovery is really jarring me. A lot of the focus on recovery seems to be about recovery of curriculum and data and progress, as opposed to recovery of the human being and recovery of our mental health and our well-being. So thinking about meeting the needs of young people and returning to school, I'm going to focus primarily on how we can meet them and greet them and look after them as humans first and learners second. And these two pictures just really made me think about kind of like how we identify and find those gaps, because the gaps we are used to looking for might not exist, and we now need to change our lens and be more vigilant and look for different types of gaps. And secondly, that top image is thinking about how we are building the bridge as we walk across it. We are in a very bizarre situation where all the things we've relied on, all the things that have worked for us previously, aren't necessarily going to work for us moving forwards, and it's how we can reflect on which bits can we carry forward that do work, and what do we need to change, and what do we need to do differently in our new kind of like landscape and our new horizons. So I've got 10 slides for you, and this is my brainstorming of like what are the 10 things, my 10 key messages for you. And we're going to think a little bit about transition for all children at all stages of the school, thinking about how to reinforce the routines that have been lost over the last few months, considering the impact on the curriculum, but with a primary focus on the inner curriculum, thinking about the safe spaces that our young people are going to need in our schools, considering who is now vulnerable, because that's now changed, looking at the lens of vulnerability through diversity and inclusion with a particular focus on race in the wake of all the Black Lives Matter raising awareness campaigns, and then thinking about how this is going to manifest in mental health, in trauma, and how we might deal with it through things like counselling. And then my final slide is thinking about other stakeholders. So for any of you who have done leadership theory through MAs or MPQs, you probably recognise this graph. So Kubler-Ross did a lot of research into bereavement, loss and grief. And this is the kind of the cycle we go through when we experience those extreme emotions. But we have been through bereavement, grief and loss, whether or not we've lost a human being or not. And I think we need to consider that as one of our lenses to look at our young people through, that they are all dealing with some sort of sense of loss, bereavement or grief. And that is going to manifest in different ways at different times in the coming weeks and months. And how can we anticipate that, and how can we prepare for that? So thinking about transition, like transition is such an anxious time period for children anyway, particularly our year 6 is going to year 7, our year 11 is going to year 12, and our year 13 is going to university. But I really want us to consider how actually we need to consider our transition schemes, our transition projects, our transition processes for every young person in the building. And that's quite overwhelming even considering that. When I was a head teacher of a startup school, and every year our school was very different, and we needed to do the kind of the external transition to onboard the new young people, but we also needed to consider about the internal transition for our very small year 7 group becoming the year 8s with twice as many year 7s underneath them. And we had as much change to deal with internally as we did externally. So we're all aware there's going to be a lot of anxiety from everybody, and our normal transition processes aren't necessarily going to work. And what can we do differently? A lot of schools suspend the curriculum at the start of the academic year, and you might be doing that in your kind of like transition processes, but really thinking about how we can reduce that anxiety and reassure the emotional state of mind over the summer in particular, I think is going to make a big difference. And then how can we mitigate some of that emotional fallout? If we anticipate who's going to be the most impacted or troubled or concerned. I know some schools are doing a very, very slow phased return for children with EHCPs, for example. They're coming in for 1 hour each day the first week, 2 hours the second week. I think the slower and the deeper and the more cautious we are in some of our processes, hopefully the more sustainable and the deeper the impact will be. So thinking about how we are preparing every single young person to return to school, and the fact that school is no longer what school was, and how we can prepare them for the changes. I've seen some amazing videos. You might have seen on Twitter yesterday, one head teacher has built his school on Minecraft, and he has got a Minecraft 4D virtual experience for the children to see the school. So thinking about how we can use technology to really prepare young people for what the school's going to look and feel like. considering those partnerships we need to build. So partnerships within the team, thinking about all those individual key workers and how we're going to deploy our non-teaching staff in particular, but also thinking about those external partnerships and how we can work with our parents and our carers in particular. And then I know there's a lot of anxiety around the fact that young people have lost that opportunity to celebrate the end of the key stage. And they haven't necessarily got closure, our year sixes in particular, our year 11s and our year 13s. And we're going to be mega busy as we return to school, but considering how we can loop back and reconsider some of those missed opportunities for the young people to be celebrated, but also to seek that emotional closure for a really pivotal time in their journey, I think that's something else to consider as well. So moving on to routines, from all the heads who I'm connected with, I've got a big network of friends who are head teachers. I think we really need to focus on routines. We know that after a 6-week break, a lot of children forget how we expect them to behave. They've had months off. Some of the basics around how to hold a knife and fork, what time to go to bed, how to tie their tie. The fact that I'm seeing lots come up about kids being hungry all day because they're used to snacking whenever they want at home. Kids struggling with toilet rolls in schools because they're used to being able to go to the toilet when they want. And I think another thing to consider is the kind of the movement around the building and going back to being static in classrooms. And also for some young people who have perhaps been in quite quiet houses without siblings for the last few weeks, the last few months, they're going to struggle with the interaction. So I think it's almost like we're going back to when they first started with us, back in year 6, going into year 7, and how can we revisit and reinforce, but also reframe how some of these things are going to be moving forward. And I think getting the basics right and getting that kind of reinforced will bring a bit of stability and a bit of security back to the community before we start to push on with the bigger kind of gaps we need to close. So thinking about the curriculum, when I think about the curriculum, I always frame it in 2 ways. We have the curriculum, the core curriculum, the lessons we teach between 9 and 3 or 9 and 3:30. But we also then have the inner curriculum. And if you've not seen or read Neil Hawkes' book, The Inner Curriculum, I really recommend it. It wasn't a kind of a term or a phrase I was that familiar with, but when he came to visit me at OIS, he looked at what we were doing and he said to me, "You've basically brought my book to life." Because some of the pledges we had about how our time outside of lessons was used and utilised to support and nurture and develop our young people, that SMSC and PSHE and the kind of the pastoral side of stuff was as important as the core curriculum. And to read the core curriculum, I think the thing I'm most worried about with the curriculum moving forwards is some of the headlines I'm reading, and I know they're pretty sensationalised, about the arts in particular. So we look at some countries like New Zealand, there's a massive pledge for millions of pounds to go into the arts education. And they're using arts as one of their levers to actually help young people transition and process their emotions. And then we see headlines over here where it's the arts that's being cut in some schools. And I worked for one of the MATs that's been in the press recently about the fact that the arts is going to be diminished in that group of schools. And I think we need to keep the arts up front and sort of centred to our core curriculum offer. I know it's going to be harder, particularly with some subjects where there's more contact like drama or that there's instruments like music. But I think our young people are really going to need the arts as a way to express everything they've been through in the last few months. Thinking about safe spaces, consider it like based on your school layout, you might not have lots and lots of spare offices and classrooms, but I think creating safe spaces for the young people to go to is going to be really, really needed. So some of the young spaces that we had as a school are just listed here. We had an art therapy room where we hosted a charity and we had 3 practitioners and we had primary schools coming up to us for sessions, but our young people from our school accessed it as well. And we referred 10 vulnerable children twice a week to go to that space, and it really reaped a lot of benefits for them. We also created a nurture room, particularly for Key Stage 3, those young people who really struggle with going from primary to secondary and suddenly being in a big building and a big kind of like group of people at breaks and lunches. And it was just a quiet space they could self-refer to or staff could refer them to. And I think alongside that, the sensory room, I'm quite worried about some young people who are going to really struggle with just the amplification of noise and interactions coming back into school. I don't consider myself particularly sensitive to noise or sort of sensory overload, but on the 2 or 3 occasions where I have been somewhere with more than 4 or 5 people, I have personally really struggled with that sensory overload and the noise around me and the number of people around me. And I think we need to think about how that's going to be amplified in a school setting and how we can mitigate some of that, and how we can also quite counterbalance it. And then we also had a Thrive room. So Thrive is a programme that a lot of primary schools do, and they have 2 practitioners trained. And we have a Thrive school as a secondary school. We had a lot of vulnerable young children join us in Year 7. We had a lot of kids with EHCPs. And having those designated staff in that Thrive room really, really helped. So I think thinking about how we can redesignate spaces, perhaps in the short to medium term, to make sure we're creating that feeling of safety as they return to school, is going to make a big difference for the young people too. And then considering vulnerability, I mean, every school obviously has their CP register, but I know a lot of schools, and we certainly did, we had our own vulnerable register as well. And the shadow register was 3 times the length of the CP register. And we had all those children who had been monitored or who were posing sort of like concerns but weren't quite meeting those different thresholds. And I think moving forwards, we probably need to reconsider the identification criteria for who goes onto our vulnerable register, our shadow register, because different things are going to have experienced, they're going to experience different things, but it's going to manifest in different ways as well. And we might look at those children who we know who are historically vulnerable, but there's going to be new categories emerging. And I just found that image this morning of the balloon about to pop. And I kind of think we're going to have some ticking time bombs. We're going to have some young people who have been sitting on their emotions, eating their emotions, sort of like submerging their emotions for the last few months. And we know that things are going to trigger them on their return, and it's how we can anticipate that, and how we know what to look out for. What are those kind of signals and those triggers that we're going to be looking out for, and all staff can then be vigilant. Thinking about diversity and inclusion in particular, so obviously in the last 4 or 5 weeks, there's been a lot happening globally that is causing a massive social and emotional fallout. And depending on the schools you serve and the communities and how diverse they are, I think we need to be painfully and acutely aware of the fallout of the Black Lives Matters issues, incidents. The way it's being talked about, it's almost like being framed and suggested that it's just happened and this is a new thing. Like, we're talking about historic situations here that are just surfacing now. But because they are happening on national media during lockdown and everyone's got more access to media, I feel like it's more amplified than perhaps it has been in the past. I have got a big network of diverse educators and leaders who I'm friends with, and I'm quite aghast that I know a lot of Black teachers and head teachers when no one has checked in with them. We know that there's going to be trauma and there's going to be a deep impact on a lot of individuals and their families. And I think we need to be really, really aware of the emotional support that individual children and families are going to need, and staff, on their return. But I also want us to be mindful of the fact there are 9 protected characteristics. And I fell prey of this, that I consider myself a diversity advocate and a very inclusive person, but I was so absorbed in supporting and amplifying what was going on around Black Lives Matters. I knew there was stuff going on in the trans community, but I perhaps got distracted. And a few people reached out to me that there was a lot of trans individuals experiencing a lot of trans hate. And we need to make sure that we're not just looking at race as one of the 9 protected characteristics, but we're considering all of those vulnerable groups and all those marginalised groups and how they are feeling. And I popped sensory issues on here because actually children with SEND and children with disabilities, that might be something that amplifies for them. So just 2 organisations I wanted to signpost to you here. Educate and Celebrate are a fantastic organisation who works with schools on diversity. They use the lens of LGBTQI safe schools as their way in. But the way Ellie and Anna and the team work, we found it really helpful as a school. It made us scrutinise and audit and look at our whole offer in a very different way. So there's a framework you can self-evaluate against. But if you buy into that membership, and it's not very expensive, you get a book of diverse books to go into your library, you get training for 2 members of staff, and they become part of a network. So I just wanted to signpost that as an organisation I really endorse. And secondly, Andrew Moffat, who you're probably aware of from social media, he and his colleagues run the campaign No Outsiders, and your school can sign up to the pledge and purchase that plaque to go in your reception to signify and symbolise to everybody who steps into your school how inclusive your school is, and the pledge you're making to make everyone feel equal and everyone to be seen and heard. So just two things there I wanted to signpost. So thinking about mental health in particular, thinking about therapies rather than interventions, I worry that we're going to perhaps put plasters on some of the problems, and we're going to go for reactive, responsive, knee-jerk kind of solutions, when actually what we need to be doing is thinking proactively, preventatively, and working preemptively. So thinking about your offer and the universal entitlement for your school community, but then sort of like targeted, personalised offers for particular groups. So some of the things we've offered in the past, I mentioned the art therapy already, and you don't have to have an art therapist to do that. We had an art teacher with some spare capacity, and she had a small group where she just used art as a talking circle, and it helped those young people find their voice. At my last two schools, I've set up boxing therapy. If we think about those young people who perhaps their emotions manifest in a very strong way, primarily through anger, we found that boxing therapy really helped as an outlet, but also for self-discipline and for controlling that emotional outlet. And we just reached out to the local boxing club, and two of the boxers came in and ran that program for boys and girls. It wasn't just for boys. I know talking therapy and talking circles are really big in primary schools, and perhaps for our year 6 into year 7, that is something they're used to using and as a space for sort of like sharing their thoughts and their feelings. So that might be something for us to think about. And we had coaching circles rather than tutor groups in my school, and we broke them down into smaller circles regularly. So like groups of like 8 to 10 would come together with different members of staff to talk. And I found that really, really powerful. So I had the group of like vulnerable year 8 girls, and we just met once a month. And that safe space just gave them an opportunity to kind of share what they were thinking and what they were experiencing. And they were the quieter girls who perhaps would have got lost in a normal tutor group or a normal kind of class situation. I think also considering outdoor learning is quite important, because a lot of our young people will have been cooped up inside for a long time, depending on where you are geographically in the country. I think thinking about that physical release, but thinking about nature in particular. I know that I've worked in several communities in London and in Oxfordshire where I've got young people who do just sit on the Xbox every night and every weekend. And we had a group of boys, primarily in year 7 and year 8, who didn't do things like going mountain biking, and we created an outdoor learning offer for them on a Friday afternoon, and it just gave them that kind of release and an opportunity to channel their energy in a different way, and it was quite a good bonding experience for the staff and the children who went on that as well. So just some things to consider there, really the kind of the therapies for mental health. And then as that kind of like level of mental health gets more exaggerated and more extreme, thinking about the kind of the trauma. So I think a lot of people around us have experienced different levels of trauma in the last few weeks and months. And something that I've talked about quite a lot is the fact that in schools we are regularly co-regulating young people, and they're quite reliant on us to co-regulate their emotions and co-regulate their behaviours. And some of them would have really struggled at home learning how to self-regulate. And I think that's something to really consider as they come back into school, that their behaviours might have changed. And their behaviour is going to be that iceberg. We're going to see the tip of the iceberg, and there might be some quite extreme kind of like acting out behaviours, or some very extreme sort of like withdrawal behaviours, and we need to unpick what's going on below that surface. And I think it's quite a delicate sort of like relationship, that we don't want to go probing or assuming that every Black person has had trauma because of Black Lives Matter, or every PP child has experienced lockdown in a similar way. It needs to be personalised and it needs to be tentative, but we really need to think about how we can create those spaces to find out what the true experience and the individual experience of trauma for those individuals has been. I just wanted to signpost 3 practitioners who we did a lot of work with. So Betsy Thierry has written The Little Book of Trauma, and she runs a trauma centre in Bristol and Oxford, and she is an amazing trainer. So I really recommend looking her up and booking somebody in your school onto her training. And then Mike Armiger, who's also from the Southwest, from Bristol, He's an amazing mental health speaker, and he came and ran whole staff training for me at Orius on trauma and being trauma aware. So that might be something you want to look at. And I'm sure you're all aware of ACEs and the work of Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris in California. Her TED Talks on my last slide, I've got some signposting for you. Really recommend watching that and thinking about ACEs and how we can utilise that kind of information and data about our young people moving forwards. Counselling is something that schools don't necessarily have a budget for, and I think we're going to be making priorities about our spend moving forward. And I know we've got like budget to recoup from everything that's gone on, but I think if we're going to invest in one thing, then perhaps investing in a counselling service would be really beneficial to both the children and the staff. We had a partnership with Place to Be. They actually took the art room over, so we worked with them through the art room and through Place to Be. And you can pay a membership, and then you get an entitlement to staff training as an introduction to counselling, but you also get an entitlement for school counsellors in your school. And I just popped this data off of their website. This is the data pre-lockdown. I hate to think of the increase in some of these ratios and statistics moving forward. But I think as well as the kind of the one-to-one support of a counsellor, we also need to think about our student voice and how we are going to canvass the feedback of the young people and find out their individual interpretation and story of what's been happening. And they ultimately are going to want to be listened to. And we know that schools are really busy and we're going to be dealing with lots and sort of like reacting to lots, but how can we create that listening culture? To particularly find out about the grief and the bereavement, and that counselling will then close that gap and address that specifically. Because I do think we need to remember that those of us who work in the mental health and wellbeing space, we're not counsellors, we're not therapists, and we do need to have that triage to escalate things up the kind of the channel. And my final slide, I know we're focusing here about learners, but I just want us to think about other stakeholders as well, because I know from the teachers I'm connected to, we've also got a massive concern moving forward about staff wellbeing. And we know that our staff need to be well in order to support the wellness of our young people. And how can we have that dual focus, I guess, on our students and on our staff? We've also got the additional things to consider around our parent and carers' mental health. And how that is going to have been impacted and affected over the last few months, and the trauma that some families will have been through, and how we can support them at like the teams around the family. And just particular staff to consider. I know a lot of staff who have been shielding are feeling very anxious about coming back to school because they've had such a big chunk out. I know a lot of staff are really worried about not being prepared enough for September because they can't get into their classrooms, etc. And from a safeguarding point of view, I mean, I've been a DSL, it's the most stressful job I've ever held, that's for sure. That 24/7 nature of being part of the safeguarding team, but making sure we've got an entitlement for supervision for our DSLs, I think is really important as well, because I think the safeguarding caseload is going to increase 3, 4, 5 times what we've already got. And that work's going to become even more important, and how can we have the support structures and systems there to support them. And my final slide, and Lisa will email these all out to you. I just wanted to signpost a couple of websites, a couple of organisations, a couple of awards. I'm one of the coaches on the Mental Health in Schools Award, and that really helped us consider the kind of the distributed leadership of our mental health and wellbeing pledge at our school. And just some other organisations that I wanted to recommend that might help your SLT and your leads moving forwards. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Hannah. That was a tremendous and thought-provoking beginning to our morning. And I think there is a danger that the pressures of the immediate will often make us neglect some of these areas. Now, and thank you for provoking us to think much more about gaps in different ways. I think one of the concerns about the UK system is it's always been focused on very narrow academic gaps, but the heart of it is much more. And whole ed, of course, has always been at its heart about relationships between people. It was lovely to have such attention to detail and practical ways and organisations that could guide us and help us, because I think one of the pressures on teachers is to be this all-encompassing expert, and there's lots of organisations that can help us with many of those areas, and Lisa, I've no doubt will circulate them all to you after the sessions. I think the inner curriculum thing you mentioned earlier on, Hannah, was very powerful, and one of the things we've always argued in in whole education. It's about the whole curriculum, and I sometimes worry that we separate the two things. There's no reason to me why in every lesson and in every area of the curriculum we can't integrate some of those things, but it is a useful way of looking at what you do. There was one. I liked your one thing, Hannah. If the one thing you did is appoint a counsellor or get someone trained as a counsellor or someone to lead that area. We went down a sort of narrower pastoral focus in England, and it's interesting, many countries, in New Zealand that you mentioned, it's the absolute norm to have a counsellor in the school, isn't it, Hannah? There was one specific question. Tell us a little bit more about the Thrive Room. You might have noticed it on the questions. What is it?
I've just put the link in actually, and I'll add it onto my slides and resend them to Lisa. So Thrive is an approach where children who have had disrupted childhoods and their development has not had a linear kind of journey, the Thrive practitioner works with them in almost taking them back to that disruption and moving them forward. So it's very, very bespoke, personalised, one-to-one interventions. And I had some very vulnerable young people who had had very tricky childhoods, and it really helped them. It was really around their emotional maturity and their emotional resilience.
Thank you, Hannah. And finally, I like your 3 Ps: the proactive, and seeing the whole thing as not just an immediate knee-jerk response. This is part of a much longer term agenda, and the more we can be proactive and preempt things. So thank you, Hannah. That was a wonderful start to the morning, and no doubt we'll bring you back a little later on. Going to secondly go to John Clark from Walsall Academy. John's work impresses me in so many ways, and at the heart of it is a very challenging area that's under great pressure at the moment of outdoor education. But one of the things that made me smile is the practical way he responded to the challenges of getting the school open in 2-meter social distancing. And I remember on one of our earlier sessions, when we have the heads, smaller groups of heads together on the regular Thursdays, John saying, well, I got out a tape measure. And you were saying earlier on, John, that you're known as the hoarder of that tape, and so you can tell us about that. But really, John, as we bring you in, it's your work on culture and well-being that perhaps impresses most. And what would you like to add about how you're addressing the different needs of learners, John?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I have hoarded. I'm not hoarding at the moment. I think I need to hoard some more.
Beautiful,
tape. We've gone through about 25 rolls of it, so quite a lot of, like all schools really. And now we're moving to our next phase. But really, I'm sort of talking about turning something that was a weakness into a strength. And if anybody's aware of harm philosophies, this is what I'm going to be talking about. I'm just sharing my screen now because Harm 1941 was setting up, he was working at Gordonstown and setting up Outward Bound, and he realised that if we really focus on our weaknesses, we can turn them into strengths and we can create opportunity. And when all of this started, we thought about, well, we've been musing, chuntering about how we need to think about education for many years now, and many of us aren't satisfied with what we're actually doing, and it's given us opportunity. So this is a weakness and we're trying to turn it into a strength. This presentation I'm just going to run you through was actually used with all of our staff. We've moved all of our training online. We do everything by TED Talks now, which I'm going to talk about later on. But let's have a look through. So it's planning for 4D learning. I'm going to explain what that means in a little while. Dweck, and I do really think myself as a half glass full person. Okay, and I'm into the idea that we're into growth mindsets, thinking about what we can do, how we can achieve it, because education isn't just about a result, it's about the whole person, it's about our social interaction, it's about how we look after young people. And it's amazing to follow on from Hannah, because so many of the things that she's been saying, we know that we do here, we work with, we align with her thought process, and we have place to be in our buildings, and we know that our young people are facing some very challenging times, but we've got an opportunity now, so let's make the most of that opportunity, and that's what we've been doing. The sacred eyes are something that our staff are hounded by, but also understand. We had Ofsted in November. The idea of intent and implementation and impact, and everything's about, well, why are we doing it? If it's not doing to the benefit of the children, why are we doing it anymore? Let's think about this one. And this time we've had working virtually and across networks has allowed us to think about, well, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And what's the best way of doing it and approaching it? As a school, we've looked and been using different theoretical models. As David's just said, I'm an outdoor practitioner. I'm very much aligned with learning outside the classroom, the Learning Way Consortium. And from my own childhood, I was indoctrinated, some may say, into the world of Outward Bound. I completed my 104th course the week before lockdown started. I should have been on my 105th the day it started. But Harm's theories about curiosity and having spirit and tenacity of pursuit and being able to say, no, that's not the right way forward. But above everything, and something that's come through in our society, is compassion and that social responsibility, and realizing that we're capable of way, way more than we ever thought of. And maybe in the last 3 months, we've realized that far more. Our staff here at Walsall are very used to the idea of Harm philosophies, but also working with Outward Bound because all of our children undertake Outward Bound courses. Big picture learning, many of you know of big picture learning and how it works. Our staff have been talked to about it, but also the idea of flip learning, using our time as effectively as possible in the classroom and putting some more mundane tasks out of the classroom so the students prepare to come into the classroom ready to learn and actually be an intrinsic part of the learning process. Expeditionary learning, some of you know of the XP school, which is part expeditionary learning up in Doncaster. I spent time working with expeditionary learning schools in New York City and wrote a paper about the impact of expeditionary learning schools. It's about the mastery of knowledge and skills, character, and character is something that's becoming more and more in what we do every day, but also achieving high quality work through craftsmanship and learning by doing something and not being afraid to fail and moving forwards and having critique and sharing. And I'm actually sat in an office not of my own. I'm next to a classroom where I'm going to be teaching and using EL skills with a group of boys at 11 o'clock this morning. So I'm actually still working and using that. And I firmly believe in a lot of the ideas that come through from expeditionary learning. And many of you have seen Ron Berger talk. And if you haven't, watching is amazing, inspirational guy. Longitudinal learning, the idea that we've got the assessment for learning. My background is in assessment for learning. If anybody looks at the old teacher strategy videos, I'm sorry, that was a few years ago now. They were all me. But thinking about the Kolb learning cycle built in, the idea of that we've got plan, do, review, but it's actually about experiences, reflecting, conceptualizing, and experimentation. And we as a school undertook some research to do with KED and Kunskapsskolan. We've got some of the coaching systems built in. But what you can see is that our school has gone through many different thought processes and researching and not being satisfied with what we can do. And I think not being satisfied and looking to those weaknesses helps us to become a stronger institution. So into the 4D age, what have we done and where we are and where we're going? Home, independent learning, face-to-face teacher time, researching, online tutorials, and student-led evaluations of work in progress. We don't have parents' evenings here at Walsall Academy. We have student-led family conferences, SLCs, where the student takes the parent and their tutor through their work. They lead it, it is their meeting, they welcome everybody, and at the end of it they write an action plan, and something we found to be very, very powerful. Our 4D age then is transferring the learning, the agency of learning, into the realm of the student, but time. One thing that I've found incredibly difficult over this 3 months is not working at 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm thinking that everybody else should be working, reading at 2 o'clock in the morning, then getting up at weird times, because time has become more amorphous in what we do. And our young people, we know different people work differently at different times. And if we can actually address that, we can look at a different model or way of working. So this is a concept. We launched this with all of our staff several months ago, and we can see it now coming through in the planning and the schemes of work for this year. So this is the idea of 4D learning, stepping beyond time. So first of all, we have a grapple, the intent. The grapple doesn't have to be focused. It doesn't have to have an objective. It can be, I want you to go away and read this, that, the other, to actually inspire, develop that love of learning and immerse the student in the learning process. Then focus it, refine that focus, and an explanation of a longitudinal learning project. We work in 4-week modules. So this is, for this module, we're going to be looking at, remember in your grapple, you did this, that, the other. Well, this is how it's all going to fit in. And by the end of this block, you're going to be able to do. But we're going to build these blocks together and you're going to build it independently. The implementation process is the idea that students will be working online, working at home. And obviously, like everybody, we're looking at, are we really going to be here all of September? Are we going to be here all of October? And we can just flip the switch and away the students go. They're working at home. Targeted differentiation support becomes actually easier at that point because you can put out specific resources for the young people, but also that face-to-face contact or online contact when you don't have to look at someone's face. And that is really important for some young people. We found that actually they communicate far better across teams than they do in a classroom. They feel more secure, more comfortable, and they'll express their ideas and thought process far more eloquently, and we are cherishing that time with them. We then think about reviewing. This is where it builds in some EL principles that actually things aren't right, they aren't fixed, there is critique. So online tutorial coaching, self-evaluation, peer review, what's wrong with two students talking, but a teacher there being moderator and coach, and then development and review of the work, which then brings out a summative piece of work, and the final assessment process, which comes with a student-led assessment of their learning, the presentation of their learning, and targeting into the next steps of their learning. So you can see at the bottom, we've got the flow of intent, implementation, and then impact. But all of this is not fixed in the classroom. It's actually fixed into when you work. So our lessons at Walsall Academy for 17 years have been 2 hours, 50 minutes long. So doing our timetable socially distanced is a lot easier than many places. So sorry, everybody, we were there before you. So we have morning and afternoon. Why do all of our students need to be in the building all of the time? And we're grappling with all of this now, how we develop more flexible learning for our teachers, for our students, and prepare them actually more for the workplace that they're going to go into, but allow them to work as effectively as possible. I move on to what it means for us, because this was the slide that I used with the staff, because we've been using EL-inspired approaches and project-based learning for several years. Our BTEC work, we're moving more and more into students working flexibly and embracing technology. We're big into Teams and using Teams. Our big issue is digital poverty. We're getting around that one. We're finding solutions, because every time we see a weakness, we find a strength. And I finished all my slides with the idea that I am outward bound. And if anybody understands outward bound, it's actually a flag called the Blue Peter. You fly it as you go out on your journey, and the blue square there and the white square in the middle is actually the outward bound flag, known as the Blue Peter. And it's thinking about being a growth mindset, thinking about now we've been given an amazing opportunity to go forward, to make a change, and to think about what we do and how we can make it more flexible in terms of the experience we give to our young people, the way we use time, the way we actually think about working. and what we cherish in terms of outcomes. And I'd like to just link back to Hannah and say, yes, social skills should be measured. They should be shown. They are vitally important. It is not about a GCSE result. And if we all fly that Blue Peter flag, we will be outward bound on our journey. So it is quite a big concept to think of, but moving it forwards, we talk about being outward bound, but also as 4D learners. So hopefully that's given you an approach that we're using here at Walsall Academy. And it's going to be very interesting to see how we develop that over the coming months and years, because we are taking feedback from staff at all times. We're counselling their opinions, and it seems to be very positive, but we're all working in little silos at the moment. When we come back to school, be interesting.
It will indeed, John. Thank you for that. There's a day with you on that at least, but also remembering the sort of model we have within Whole Ed: start small and build. And John, you've built a lot of that over time, and it's fascinating to see it grow. I love the notion of focus on a weakness and turn it into strength. And I think the other thing that comes through to me is what we do in our schools is in our hands. John Dunford, who was chair of Whole Education until about a year ago, always used to talk about look out rather than look up. And too often we wait to be told, whereas one of the features of the English system is actually more choices are in our hands than we think. And if we stay true to our principles and beliefs and our commitment to our young people in a whole education way, almost anything's possible. And John has given us a sense of that going forward. But in this network, this is something that you don't just look at and think, oh, I'd like to do that. This is something you work on, share, collaborate together to development and implement over time. John, thank you very much for that. In our final part of this session before the break, we in a sense go into the area of being better data informed. And John alluded at the end of his presentation to this notion of measuring what you value. The work of GL and before them, the NFER, when they took over from it, has often been particularly influential on my thinking in schools. And one of the reports they published last year, which no doubt we can highlight in the links, was on the lost middle. And to me, they're often a key and an overlooked group, particularly if you follow them around on a student pursuit. It's the group that probably get least talked to and attention during the day. I've often believed if you get that group right, you tend to get the school right. And the other thing James is going to take us into is this a tool that's become very popular amongst Whole Ed schools, the pupil attitude to self and school psychometric, or it was perhaps overflating it, survey. So James O'Brien from GL.
Thanks, David, and hi everyone. I'm James from GL. Let me share my screen with you. There we go. Over the next 5 minutes, I just want to share with you a little of what we've learned from schools that we have been working with, and explain a bit about how we can help with identifying and supporting these new key groups that we might be seeing as part of the new normal. So firstly, we know that this period of time may have created new key groups within the student population, and every child will have been affected in a different way. This week, we were reading about a survey of parents across the country, which was showing that parents of under 11s largely agreed that on average, their children's increase in stress and behavioural problems had increased as lockdown went on. But parents of teenagers, on the other hand, were tending to report that on average their children's behaviour and emotional well-being had continued much as before, and they didn't seem to have noticed much difference. But then there were some parents, including those with children who had SEN or pre-existing mental health issues, who said that their offspring's emotional behaviour had tended to improve during lockdown. So there really is no normal now. And a big unknown is how these varied experiences will play out once children all return to school. Anecdotally, we've also heard from Asenko that we're working with that concentration levels have dropped significantly over time from a group that he was working with before to now, and before concentration spans were getting up to about a lesson at a time, and now seem to have declined to about 7 minutes. So a big question here is, how can we help students settle back in, and what new feelings and attitudes might be behind those new behaviours that we're seeing? And And as David suggested, the PASS survey is one way that we can help with this. This is the Pupil Attitudes to Self and School survey, and I know a lot of whole education schools are already familiar with this. Just in case you're not, it's a 50-question psychometric survey which delves into pupil mindsets, and the results are standardized against a national picture. We've been in touch with one of our partner schools, who are also a whole education school, Shenley Brook End in Milton Keynes. And hello if you're on the call. They've written a blog for us recently to talk about the way they have been using PASS and will continue to use it, and said it's taken on added significance for them this year because it will help them to identify if lockdown has made a difference to the way pupils approach school. And in particular, they'll be able to make sure the right pupils receive the right support from the right staff members. And I'll put up a screenshot of a PASS report to go into that in a bit more detail. You can see it's RAG rated and that's standardized. If I just take the first column there, which is feelings about school, that explores whether a pupil feels secure, confident, and included in their learning community. And at Shenley Brook End, what they were telling us is that anyone with low scores here could go on to have a conversation with the school counsellor, who could then explore this in more depth. The next factor I'll highlight there is perceived learning capability, and that gives us an insight into pupils' level of self-respect, determination, and openness to learning. And any individual with low scores here could go to see progress leaders or similar, who won't necessarily have the answers, but they'll now have the right questions to ask that pupil to start the conversation around support. I won't go through all 9 factors just now, but I will highlight attitudes to attendance here. That's a really interesting one, because we know that low scores here are strongly correlated with actual truancy rates later on in school life. So pupils with low scores here might be telling us something about what they feel about physically being in the building as opposed to being somewhere else at that time. So they might benefit from early intervention work with attendance officers or pastoral leads. Then a second theme that we're picking up from conversations with schools is how literacy rates might have been affected in both the short term and the long term. And it goes without saying that remote learning may have disadvantaged weaker readers who would ordinarily need quite targeted support in school. But what about middle and higher ability readers who may have shown no concerns in school, but have now not had the human or technological resource to continue making the same rates of progress at home? And either way, we know that having a reliable measure of reading ability in place will be critical for planning next year's curriculum and how to work with all these students at varied starting points. And establishing the baseline from which to work is something that we can help you with. The new group reading test, or NGRT, I know is something that, again, a lot of whole ed schools are using. It's a 30-minute digital assessment, which can give you a standardized score, which is this column here, which will show you how students compare to their peers nationally, so that you can target intervention appropriately and you know where to start planning the curriculum for the different groups. It'll also give you a reading age, which along with the standardized score will allow you to measure progress over time and then the impact of any specific intervention work that you're doing. And what's really interesting here is if you happen to be using NGRT alongside the PASS survey, for example, you might be able to start identifying students who may not have been a concern on reading before, but have come back to school and the data might be showing you there's something worth exploring. Maybe they've gone down a little bit unexpectedly. Can we then have a look at the results from their PASS survey? And can we isolate any factors that might be a particular concern and start to just triangulate what we know about the pupil, and again, leading towards conversations with certain staff members. If we know that attainment in a certain area is dropping, what might be the underlying mindset or feelings behind that we could start to explore? And a final thing I'll just highlight here is the ability to use this to highlight students who may have more complex needs that might have been developing over time. You can see the scores for 2 parts of the test here, sentence completion and passage comprehension. And any students who see a big difference between the scores on both of those things might have more complex underlying linguistic needs, so could go for further investigation to find the root cause of that issue. A final point from me, some of you might have joined our webinar in April where we heard from South Shore Academy in Blackpool, who've done some wonderful work improving literacy at the school using NGRT data, starting with this, delivering a literacy program and then rerunning NGRT to check in at the end or partway through to see if they're still on track. So if you missed that webinar or you'd like to read their report, then please do get in touch with us. And I'll be using that email address on the screen. So that's backtoschool@glassessment.co.uk.
Thank you, James. And
Thank
Jill
you.
has been a great partner for whole education and a great way of helping us target our energies and efforts, but also helping us measure what we value. I've always believed you get the culture right, anything's possible. And I think so if we don't look at the wider factors, which has been the continuity through this session, we miss one of the most important things of all. In the end, if the attitude's right and students feel confident and have a sense of what they can achieve, they are more likely to be successful. And often we've been too narrow in our focus. It's time for a break. We're slightly late, but we'll be back, I think, at 10:15. So enjoy the break. Go and do share on chat some of the wonderful things you may be eating or drinking, and anything else you might be doing. We'll see you back in just slightly less than 15 minutes at 10:15. Thank you for the 350 or so who are with us this morning, and we'll see you all again shortly. Any questions, comments, reflections, do record them on the chat or in the questions section. Thank you very much indeed.